called Our Whole Lives, Lifespan Sexuality Education. And sometimes it's abbreviated to OWL. It's a series of sexuality education curricula that help participants make informed and responsible decisions about sexual health and behavior. So, as you'll see, there's curriculum for every age group, from young children to older adults. Okay, I'm gonna just try to stay back here. So I was drawn to this program because, frankly, sexuality had always fascinated me and also confused me. The sexuality education I received growing up wasn't quite comprehensive. And as a youth and young adult, this area was one where I had a very long list of how I will do it better someday when I'm an adult for my children or whoever. So now, as a minister, an educator, and a parent, endeavoring to do just that, these were very powerful tools that I found at OWL. And I've been very compelled ever since to find ways to be offering them in the community. So I'm gonna whip through some of the program values and assumptions, and you have this, it's one of the handouts, number 2. So, it's handout number 2 of the extra packet if you wanna learn more later. So, self-worth is one of the, is the first value. People are entitled to dignity and self-worth and to their own attitudes and beliefs about sexuality. A long list of under sexual health, but the idea that knowledge is helpful, not harmful. Every person has the right to accurate information and have their questions answered. And that healthy relationships are consensual, non-manipulative, mutually pleasurable, safe, developmentally appropriate, based on mutual expectation and caring, and respectful. And that sexual intercourse is only one way of many valid ways of expressing sexual feelings, and that it's healthier for young teens to postpone sexual intercourse. And a clarification of wording that it's not that abstinence, we know that abstinence works 100% to prohibit or to keep a pregnancy from happening or to keep STIs from happening. But the fact is that abstinence-only education does not help, does not decrease unwanted pregnancies or STIs. So that's the thing. And OWL teaches abstinence. No, OWL gives that fact, that abstinence is 100% safe. And yet that's not the only thing, and we are human people, and it's much more complicated than that. We give comprehensive, holistic, and evidence-based information. So the next value is responsibility. All persons have the right and obligation to make responsible sexual choices. I'm not gonna read all the things. And justice and inclusivity. We believe it's a justice issue. It's a human right to be able to have accurate information respectfully communicated. So some of the program assumptions are that all persons are sexual. Sexuality is a good part of the human experience. Sexuality includes much more than sexual behavior. Human beings are sexual from the time they are born until they die. It is natural to express sexual feelings in a variety of ways. People engage in healthy behavior for a variety of reasons. Sexuality in our society is damaged by many things: violence, exploitation, alienation, dishonesty, abuse of power, and the treatment of persons as objects. And the assumption is it is healthier for young teens to postpone sexual intercourse. This is just a brief overview of the curriculum components. So there is a program for each of these levels. For kindergarten, 1st grade, ages 4th through 6th grades, 7th through 9th, 10th through 12th, young adults, adults, older adults. And you can see that it's age appropriate in content, but is also appropriate in span and length. So you have the littlest ones are doing 8 one-hour sessions, and then the bulk of it is in 7 to 9, where there's 25 sessions that are an hour and a half, and that's kind of where middle school age, where you would traditionally think of like a big meaty, you know, puberty, sexuality education. And then for the older, for high school adults, then they're 2-hour sessions, they're 14, so it's something manageable. And they can be done a variety of ways, like you can do a retreat on it and do a few things, or, and there's also a spirituality companion that, the whole curriculum as well as spirituality companion was written by the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ. So it's partnership. The curriculum itself is secular, it's not religious. But if you want to, you can add this other resource for all the ages, and it's called Sexuality in Our Faith, a companion to our whole lives. So that has like a chalice ritual or a prayer or a song, like that would go with each lesson for the different things. And then there's a parent guide for the younger age groups, and there's a manual for communities of faith who are going to be advocates. What did I want to say? That I wish I could participate in the adult curriculum, but just going to the training was very informative and also very healing for me. I learned so much about myself, and you know, I think it would be good to process that with a small group, a small learning community. So it's like I want to offer all the OWL for all the people, because I think it's just would be very good for everyone. So this is a big infographic that is, that's always hung up on an OWL classroom. And it's the premise that sexuality encompasses so many aspects of our life. And that the values that I speedily went through are in the middle. And so the values, our values, the program's values, are what we use to guide and inform all of our decisions and all of these aspects of life. So you could you can make a Venn diagram of this with other things as well, but that, if we believe that the inherent dignity of all people, then that affects our intimate relationships. That affects our sexualization. That affects how we choose to express our sensuality and our needs for our skin hunger, if we believe that there are many ways that are natural to express sexuality and gender orientation, then this bottom one, then we use that to affirm and create spaces that are open enough for people to understand all the differences and to explore, that are safe to explore for their own selves and to respect for others. So we're going to be in this one. We're going to be talking about this one today, kind of breaking down gender issues. What is gender? And acknowledging that gender is a part of our sexual identity, but it is complex and it is distinct from sexual orientation. So in this bubble, this is our sexual identity. Sexual orientation is the last one. It's just one. And all these other four are ways that we break apart gender. And they're separate and distinct. They can be interrelated, but they do not necessarily define each other. So, specifically today, we're going to look at gender. Like religion, it is personal, but not private. Part of our gender might be private, but like gender is it's all in the public all the time, and it is highly politicized. So we're gonna just explore this some more, and I want to start with a question. So, what is one thing about gender that you've learned in your life, and where or how did you learn it? So take a minute. It can be something that you now believe is still correct and true, or something that you now believe is not true, you've challenged it, but what's something you've learned in your life about gender, and where or how did you learn it?
Holds power.
Gender holds power. And
How
maybe
did you
some,
learn that?
and maybe some are granted different levels of power. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So, I definitely learned that female gender expression is more flexible than male, or was taught that. I don't think it's true, but a big part of, being a tomboy and having friends who were called sissies, it was okay for me to be a tomboy, but not okay to be sissy.
So you got the message that women and girls could have a much more free expression of how to be women and girls, and you could be a tomboy, you could maybe wear different things, do different things that was expansive, that was maybe masculine or feminine, but that your male counterpoints, those who are boy or man, were not given that same freedom. They were called a sissy, while for doing a range of things or wearing a range of things, but you were allowed to be a tomboy, and you enjoyed it. Okay, anything else? Something you learned about gender.
That there are two.
Oh, that there are two. There's this one and this one. So there's a binary. That's what you were taught. Where did you learn that?
I think it was just sort of assumed by most of the people.
It was just everywhere. It's probably in children's books and probably parents and family. That's kind of when you're learning to categorize things as a small child. That's one of the, yippee, this is one of the things I can know. That's a boy and that's a girl.
Pink and blue.
Pink and blue. There are certain colors. So how did you learn that? Where did you get that?
When people have babies and they right away, if the girls are dressing pink and if the boys are dressing blue.
So the way we dress babies and the way that we even prepare to welcome a new child is to figure out what their gender is and then give them the right colors.
Along those lines, not only that there are two genders, but that they're opposites.
That they're opposite and never the twixt shall meet. Except sometimes we do this magical thing that like keeps the species alive and we're supposed to know, even though like they're, yeah. Yes?
Where I grew up, we never really put labels on gender. I grew up in Hawaii. Like we never like put a label. You're a boy. You're a girl. You're transgender. You're gay. LGBT. Whatever. So I'm finding it interesting now that you guys grew up putting labels on it.
Right, so what's your name?
Amy.
Amy. So Amy grew up in Hawaii and didn't have such a strict gendered experience and such a binary gender experience. So what were some of the things you liked to do as a child?
I mean, we all saw each other as the same. It
Just
didn't
kind of
matter our
they.
backgrounds or, I had friends who were growing up, they already knew they were gay, transgendered or whatever, but it wasn't an issue.
So there was some level of knowledge already and there wasn't the layer of shame or judgment or not fitting into certain two boxes. Yeah.
I grew up in another country, in Mexico, and it's totally different when I moved to America. It's totally different. One thing, when you're a boy, you're gonna be the breadwinner. You're gonna have the power. It's shown in the families. You always with the dad, masculinity, machismo. When you're a girl, you're gonna be a teacher, a nurse, or you're gonna be in the kitchen and have a baby.
So very, very strict gender roles.
Diminishing the women because it's a girl.
Yeah.
So it's expected. So they don't hold power. At the time when I was growing up there, so I left when I was 26. Now when I come back, I see changes. Changes is coming. There's women that are getting educated, getting into politics, into higher.
So power, now there's more power for
Yes,
feminine
it's-
gendered people.
But it still is dominated by men.
So in Mexico, another different cultural experience, it was even more rigid and more dominant binary and gender roles, and yet you're seeing change and sort of some easing up of that. Thank you. So I had a really great time looking at the UUA website, and I'm in love with the UUA website now because it has, so one of the handouts that you have is, it has a bunch of definitions on it, and it says at the top, always check the UUA website just for the most current ones. So that's what it's doing. And here we have some basic, the introduction. We are a welcoming faith. Unitarian Universalism doesn't just open its doors to people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. We value diversity of sexuality and gender and see its diversity as a profound spiritual gift. Amen.
Amen.
So then we have finding the right words, this idea that language is changing all the time. New words are born, other ones change meaning. The word queer is a good example of this. You have people a generation ago, my mother, who was like, we were told, queer was a slur. You cannot, we were taught never to say that. And then you have, for my entire life, a generation of people, the whole time I've been born, who have been reclaiming that word and now using it as an adjective to be an umbrella word or a specific word for sexuality, for gender, for busting things out of their boxes. And you have the verb of queering, but you still have in our language that remembrance and that usage as a noun, as a slur. And so that's a really tricky thing sometimes, and that it's really important to have, know who you're talking with, know what language they use, honor what language they use, and to define your terms. When we throw around a word, you and I could be talking about something completely different. So it's always good, and the more we can be gracious with each other, the more we can, fumble through mistakes or say, I'm not sure, can you tell me, what is that like for you? Is this a word that you use? So just to let you know, you should check out the website at uua.org, LGBTQ identity. There is a Identity 101 section and includes pages on asexuality, bisexuality, the word and concept queer, the word and concepts of transgender, and ways to be more welcoming and inclusive of those who claim these and other diverse identities. So here are some basic definitions. This is some beautiful theology from the website that I'm going to quote your theology. We affirm each person's ability to judge for themselves who they are and express themselves in the way that is most authentic to their soul. We honor the diversity of truths that exists within our communities. Then, facts. Gender is complex and multifaceted. In North American culture, several distinct facets of ourselves get lumped together when we talk about gender. So you have here biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression. But usually, dominant cultural expectation is that one's biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression will align in stereotypical ways, aka someone who is male will identify as a boy or man and have a masculine gender. So here we have some basic definitions that expand that and are a little more correct. So biological sex. Biological attributes such as anatomy, chromosomes, and hormones that inform whether a person is male, female, or intersex. This was one of the best new things I learned, and it was exploding my brain. That is not just anatomy that determines one's sex, that chromosomes determine it, and hormones determine it. Maybe that's not so mind-blowing for you, but I was like, oh, I didn't realize all of that. So where sex refers to biology, gender then refers to the cultural and social understandings that are layered on top of biology. If you have this body, then you should do this, should do this, shouldn't do that. Cultural expectations layered on. Gender identity is an individual's internal sense of being a man, a woman, neither of these, both, and so on. It is one's inner sense of being and one's own understanding of how one relates to the gender binary, since in our culture it's the binary, or it could be the cultural gender map. So, with the exception of agender people or agender people, who often do not have an internal sense of gender, but maybe it's more like, I'm just a person, I'm not really here or there. Most people have a gender identity. And then gender expression, the ways in which a person manifests masculinity, femininity, both, or neither, through appearance, behavior, dress, speech patterns, preferences, and more. This term refers to how a person expresses their gender identity, or the cues people use to identify gender. So these are the things that when we have little kids, they're noticing, and we're teaching them, like, this is how you know this is a girl. Why? How do kids, or how do we as mammals surviving, what are some of the cues that we see in gender expression that makes us think woman? Breasts. Long hair. So breasts are actually, breasts are not an gender expression. Breasts are biological, part of our body, but long hair is gender expression.
And we use both to identify gender.
We use both those to identify gender.
Whether we wear a dress or pants.
Dresses are for women and girls, and pants are for men and boys, right? These are some examples of gender. What's that? Makeup, yes. Earrings. Ponytails. So these are all quote unquote feminine and culturally layered on for only one, not the other, in some of our cultural expectations. A+, you guys are so good. Okay, so this is a model from OWL, from Our Whole Lives, the SEIO model of sexual identities. So all people have a biological sex. Many people, some prefer to this as sex assigned at birth. We'll be using biological sex today, and we can debate it later if you like. A gender identity, I, a gender expression, E, and a sexual orientation. So for most people, their biological sex will match their gender identity and their gender expression, and their orientation will be heterosexual, attracted to the opposite gender.
Is it true that that's a majority? Is that a majority?
I don't have that statistic, but it is most. It would be in the category of most. And I mean, I don't have statistics, but I think statistics are informed by what we know and what we report, right? So if you, or if I, for most of my life would fit that category, but then I learn something more about what it means in my overall sexual identity, I might now say, oh, actually, I'm here, I'm kind of there.
My sense of what that's getting at is that even though all of us tend to sort of have different mixtures of masculinity and femininity, more people identify as heterosexual than other than heterosexual, and more people identify as cisgender than trans or non-binary.
And that's a good term too, that's on your sheet, cisgender, which cis comes from chemistry and meaning like all in a line. So so this first bullet point would describe someone who's cisgender for the S, I, and E lining up, and heterosexual. So again, sexuality is not determined by your gender, but often culturally we expect them or want them to line up. So then the next bullet, for some people, their biological sex will match their gender identity and their gender expression, and their orientation is not heterosexual. So this would be same-sex loving people, or same-gender loving. Yeah, that's, it's like complicated, right? And then the last one, for a few people, so this is statistically lower. I don't have the statistic, but again, that's a little bit constructed as well. Their biological sex and gender identity do not match. They express or want to express their gender according to their gender identity, their inner sense of whether they are woman or man or neither or both, not according to their biological sex, not according to the sex that their parents guessed when they were a baby. Because we look at babies and we say, got that? You're this. But we really don't know. We have a great book on this. We really don't know until a kid tells us, starting around age 5 or 3 to 5. So we're making a guess, and it's hard. There are some countries now, I think it's Germany and Nepal, who are starting to put on their forms, birth certificates, a third gender, that if you don't want to guess in the binary, you can mark that.
New York City just did that.
Oh, New York City just did that this year too, thank you. So and then their sexual orientation label will not depend on personal choice, labels always are gonna depend on personal choice. So even if you memorize a chart, I'm going to, every person will define themselves how they want to. And that's also what makes this tricky and difficult for us, because I think I get the latest information and I know it, and then somebody else, their experience, they use different words, and then I feel bad, or, and then maybe I don't try next time, or write that off. So this is not a perfect or completely comprehensive chart, but this is just to kind of line them up a little bit. And so we have S, I, E, O, and just emphasizing that your sexual orientation is not defined by gender identity. They interact with each other all the time, but you can really you can have a mixture. So this example, a biological man or male, that's bad wording. This is just a minefield of even when you're trying to do it right, and some groups will use different ones, so people of goodwill, we're gonna get through it together and still create a community that's supportive. For example, a biological male can identify as a woman and also identify as a heterosexual, which means that she is attracted to masculine gender expressions. Or a biologically intersex person, so that's someone who at birth has either a mixture of male and female sex organs.
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you define heterosexual based on? Based on gender identity or based on biological sex?
That is a very good question, and we've got a unicorn coming that's gonna help us think about that.
You got the unicorn.
Yes. So a biologically intersex person may identify as a woman and identify as a lesbian, which means that she's attracted to feminine or lesbian gender expression. So this paragraph is talking about attraction to gender expressions. But there's another, okay, let's go to the next one. So this infographic is from the Trans Student Educational Resources, and they've got 2 hearts. So they have physically attracted to, in my understanding, that's sort of talking about what bodies you're attracted to, and then we have emotionally attracted to. So that's what I was thinking would be kind of, see the green we have, and this also is kind of trying to make it more of a spectrum than a binary. And do you have enough for everybody?
Yep, they got.
Okay, so you have a blank unicorn in your papers, and if you like, I invite you to sort of play around with where would you be. So the top one, gender identity. The unicorn is thinking about that rainbow. What do I identify as? So you see here they use female for this. Do I identify as a woman or a girl? Or how much do I identify as a woman? And like the circle ending point, that would be like 0, and then all the way to the arrow would be like super much. So then, and how much do you identify as a male? How much do you identify as something other, as gender queer, as a mix of both, or really neither?
But doesn't all this depend on your cultural thoughts about what a female or woman or girl is?
Yes.
Because I'm trying to put myself on there and I don't know, like I don't wear a lot of makeup or wear
Yep.
dresses all the time. But then that's me deciding that like what I grew up with as defining a girl means how female I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why there's like so many different ones. Like, so for me, I would probably say my gender identity is probably almost all the way over to the like 3/4 cross to the female. It's probably a third. No, it's probably half male. I would like, we had 2 daughters in my family, and I was always like, and my parents were a bit of coming out of a more repressive, conservative background. And my mom, so my mom has this great story about how she and her friends like lobbied for women's sports. And they got cheerleading, and then she had to do it because she lobbied for it. But she also was lobbying for like pantsuits, and she was wearing pantsuits. So that was something that was changing in her time. So like in some of these ways, my parents were like breaking out of their old cultural norms. So then they created new cultural norms for me. And like I was told, you're a girl, you can do anything you want. Sort of that expansive view of femininity that or what woman is, what girl is, that Amelia was saying. Like women's liberation happened and opened up a lot of those things in our culture. But yeah, it is culturally dependent. And then for gender expression, I would say like everyone else in my family is like super femmy, but I'm probably like half. And then most of the time I like to wear pants, and I don't wear much makeup, and I hate to paint my nails. Oh gosh. So my gender expression then would be, so I would have like 2, I would be on both of those spectrums. And it does depend on, I think you're right, that it does depend on where you're coming from.
But like I need a definition of
Yeah, okay.
Female gender in order to decide how female I am.
Right,
You know.
right. So you might be different in Hawaii. You might feel identified differently in Hawaii in that culture than in Iowa culture, than in Mexican culture.
I do want to say this, in Hawaii, like, we don't waste our time on this. It just seems like a lot of energy, like a lot of thinking, a lot of just, whoa,
Yeah.
you guys have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Amy. I think that amen to that. We do have a lot of work to do, and one of the reasons why this is important is because if we want to be better allies, if we want to create safe communities, if we want to educate our children on what is actually true and healthy, then like we have to educate ourselves first. And for some of you, this is not new at all. And for some of you, might be wanting to debate the finer points. For some people, it's like, I can't even wrap my head around the process. Why does she even have a picture of a unicorn? But the idea is we're trying to, in the litany, we're trying to build this community that is going to be safe and healthy for all people.
Something that I think is really interesting is that, so I think for all of us, our ideas about both sex and gender have been formed by our cultures over thousands of years. And ancient Hawaiian culture, like a lot of ancient Polynesian and South Pacific cultures, have more than 2 genders. So there is a third gender that has been sort of thriving in ancient Hawaiian culture for centuries. And so I think then that impacts the way people how expansively people can think.
How much work we have to do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has
Yeah,
to do though
yeah.
culturally with how obsessed you are about labels.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, maybe other cultures aren't as obsessed with
Yeah.
like figuring out how to label somebody.
Yeah.
You know, because this is all about.
And part of it is labeling yourself. There's two aspects of that, I think. There's, we have this urge in our culture to put everybody in boxes so we can figure out how to relate to them. But there's also this very important aspect, I think, of like being able to understand oneself. And if you don't have enough, if you don't find yourself in the cultural boxes that are presented to you, then how terrible is that? Like, knowing oneself is this very important part of our human experience. And so you have a lot of people who are in pain and who are deeply wounded. And so then identity has become, I think, in our culture, a very valuable way of healing and knowing oneself and like defining oneself. So, you know, there's like pros and cons of that, because then it's like, we're spending all this time on this, like, why don't we like solve poverty or like feed everybody? Okay, so then you have sex assigned at birth. So you have, that's the chromosomes, hormones, and body anatomy. And then we have physically attracted to men, women, or other genders. So that's also, the wording is different there, see? Because like the other model would say to the feminine. No, that would be, yeah, woman, man. And then this would be emotionally attracted to feminine or masculine. A really cool thing, so this is a personal thing, that I was, you know, I kind of had this, even as a child, this like interest, or like, I want to do this better, and I kind of refound that passion or calling, or whatever, recently. But I am so grateful that I managed to find a partner for my queer self whose queer self matched mine, even before we had the labels that we have now to talk about our identities. So that's just something that I'm like grateful for. I guess I had enough open culture. So I want to go through, these are some more basic definitions. So again, language is always problematic, and these are the updated ones that I have from the UU website. I gave you the print off that we have at Owl. So you have that, and this is maybe a little more expansive sometimes. So gender binary is what we were talking about. It's a system of classifying sex and gender into two distinct and disconnected forms: male, man, masculine, and female, woman, feminine, and assigning all bodies, identities, roles, and attributes to one side or the other. So I'm hearing this is not such a strong system. This is not the system in Hawaiian culture so much. The gender binary is dependent on policing people to make sure they don't digress from the system in appearance or anatomy or behavior. When we have the identifier label, who identify as non-binary, which would be outside this, they're saying like, no, I'm rejecting this. I'm not in the binary. Then we have sexual orientation. So I think most everybody knows this. But it's talking about, I like this, is interesting, that there's a gendered aspect of sexual orientation. So it's separate from gender, but the gendered aspect of it is that it's the pattern, it's the gendered pattern of a person's sexual attractions, or the gender of the people a person is attracted to, gender or genders. So it is not the same as gender, but like it's you're attracted to what gender, or what pattern, or what. That was interesting, kind of new for me.
This might help a little bit. I hope I'm not oversharing. One thing that's been interesting for me is that though, like throughout my life, I have been primarily sexually attracted to female anatomy. Most of the people that I have found myself emotionally attracted to are queer women. And so that kind of is a complex mix of how queer women often express gender identity as sort of a mix of masculine and feminine. So a lot, you know, this is a complex sexual orientation, and attraction is a mix of kind of all of it, I think.
So gender and sexual orientation are all often lumped together. We do it in our acronyms, LGBTQ. Q can be referring to gender or sexuality. T is talking about gender. L is lesbian, gay, G is gay, B is bisexual. Those are talking about sexual orientation. Because of societal expectations around sex, gender, and expression. So a transgender individual can be lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, straight, or any other sexual orientation. And everyone has a sexual orientation.
But when you talk about a transgender individual being lesbian, are you talking about them being attracted to their same biological sex or their same expression?
Yes. So if you had a transgender male, so someone who identifies as male, or sorry, you have a male biological sex person who identifies as woman, who considers themselves a lesbian, their partner, their partner would be to some extent feminine, or would identify themselves as woman. If you had a biological female who was a man, and they could be a lesbian, and they are attracted to the opposite sex, they would be attracted to someone who's a woman. So that would be a heterosexual, so a trans woman, wait, I got so confused.
It's confusing.
It is confusing, but, so we can maybe look at the chart some more and like tease it out. Because I have a couple more things that I think are worth talking about. And I am mindful that we are going wrong.
Sorry.
No, I think we're in this together, so please let me know if you wanna finish or speed up. I will. Okay, so transgender, and this is an expanded version than what you have on the paper. So transgender is a term first coined to distinguish gender benders with no desire for surgery or hormones from transsexuals. So this is another term that were traditionally classified as those who desire to legally and medically change their sex. So change their bodies and change on their identification. So that in the past has been used, and sometimes still medically is used as transsexual. More recently, the word transgender or trans with an asterisk, sometimes used with another word, have become umbrella terms popularly used to refer to all people who transgress dominant conceptions of gender, or at least all people who identify themselves as so. So this is an important thing too with language. We have a tendency to want to put people in boxes so we can understand or so we can, get it right. But it can be an umbrella term, but it's also, we have a value of allowing people to express and identify for themselves. So that can be tricky. And the definition continues to evolve. There's a couple definitions that I also stuck in here for gender dysphoria. Many trans people experience gender dysphoria, the condition of feeling one's emotional and psychological gender identity to be opposite to or different from one's biological sex. And then sex dysphoria is sort of a subcategory when further the person feels like one's body is wrong and wants to change it. So there may or may not be an element of gender dysphoria. So most people who would consider themselves transgender would say, the label I received and was not quite right. But some of them would say, and the body is also not right, and I want to change that to more accurately reflect who I really am. So then we have cisgender. We talked about that a little bit. Increasingly popular to describe people who are not trans or gender variant. In other words, those whose gender identities, presentations, and behavior quote-unquote match, according to this gender binary, according to this system, the sex you're assigned at birth. So it's a prefix with roots that mean on the same side. Trans and cis are neutral descriptors, so they don't have a gender. They can be used, a cisgender person could be used for a female cisgender person or a male cisgender, goes both ways. Trans is used for both. So we have cross-dressing and drag. Refers to occasionally wearing clothing of the quote-unquote opposite gender, and someone who considers this an integral part of their identity may identify as a cross-dresser. So again, may, this might be a term they use, but this is not a term that you want to label other people. Drag queens and drag kings are performers who offer exaggerated, performative presentations of gender and often cross-dress performatively. Cross-dressing and drag are not necessarily tied to erotic activity or sexual orientation. Then we have sort of this catch-all, genderqueer, third gender, gender fluid, and two-spirit. Terms used by people who identify as being between and or other than man or woman. They may feel they are neither, a little bit of both, or they may simply feel restricted by the gender labels. And then two-spirit is a little more controversial sometimes, but it's a complex term derived from some native North American cultures. Can sometimes mean a mixture of masculine and feminine spirits in the same body. And that's also, I think, can be a tricky term sometimes because it's like, there's the risk of cultural appropriation for people adopting that. And again, for these terms, it's best to go by what the individual you know, what they choose as their identity or label, instead of labeling the person. And then gender non-conforming or gender variant, these are general terms for people who bend gender in some way and or have non-binary gender identities. So my mom was gender non-conformant when she started wearing pants in the 60s. Now that's not so gender non-conforming. Maybe it's
Not a big deal anymore.
not a big deal anymore. But we still do, I think on the other end of the spectrum, we still, rock stars who are male or male-bodied can wear eyeliner and makeup, but like if your little young Johnny does, then that's a problem. So you might say. So I noted that on Facebook at one time there were 71 different genders you could pick. And I believe now, I was trying to verify that and like see a list. And now there's a lot, and you can also like put up to 10 of your own. And then there's also a place for pronouns there, where you can say, I am she, her, please call me she, her, or I am he, him, or I am they, them, or something else. Okay, intersex, a general term used for a variety of genetic, hormonal, or anatomical conditions in which a person's reproductive or sexual anatomy doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. When a child is born intersex, many doctors and parents respond with panic and rush to correct the perceived problem with surgery, which often causes mental and physical difficulties later in life. Some intersex individuals identify as transgender or gender variant, others do not.
I just wanted to throw out there, I've done a short presentation similar to this, and one of the things about intersex is it's not necessarily determined at birth, because a lot of times these intersex people may have genitalia that look similar to what we expect from male or female, and it can be found later on in life when they hit puberty, and puberty doesn't go through a spectrum. Even some people can live their whole lives and it's found on autopsy that, oh, this person actually had internal testes, even though we thought that they were a woman, a female. So I think the statistic was it's actually intersex conditions are more common than natural red hair.
Oh yeah, it's the one I was coming across is 1 in 2,000 people is intersex in some way. Thank you for that.
Well, it's very, very easy for chromosomes to switch.
combination.
patterns.
Right. And if you have chromosomes affecting it and hormones affecting it, there's 2 different phases of gender determinant times in fetal development. So if the brain part develops one time and then the anatomy develops later. So like there's such a range of what we have in our diverse, beautiful humanity. So transsexual, historically this term has been used to refer to individuals who have medically and legally changed their sex, or who wish to do so. Most transsexual people feel a conflict between their gender identity and the sex they were assigned at birth. Other labels used within this group include MTF, male to female, or trans woman, and FTM, female to male, or trans man. So these are all terms that sort of can describe the similar thing of someone who has transitioned from one bodily and legal identity to another, and it will depend on the person as to what terms that they identify with. Okay, transition. So this is kind of what I was just talking about. So it's a process of authentically living into one's own gender identity, often but not always including leaving behind one's assigned birth sex. May include coming out to one's family, friends, and coworkers, changing one's name and or gender markers on legal documents, hormone therapy, and or possible, though not always, some form of surgery. Not all trans people identify with the word transition, and it should furthermore never be assumed that transition is a process to be completed. Some people who have transitioned no longer consider themselves to be transsexual or transgender, and rather identify only as a man or a woman, occasionally of transgender experience. Others identify as a trans man or a trans woman. And here's a graphic that I find helpful. The term transgender is often used as a umbrella over 2 other umbrellas. So you have trans man, trans woman, who have kind of crossed over from one section of the binary to the other, and now live as the other. And they have non-binary, which has all these different possible expressions and titles, but there are like not really fitting in the binary, in one or the other. And coming out versus disclosure. Coming out of the closet refers to openly stating one's identity, usually sexual orientation. Being out means being open about one's identity. Being outed means someone else has disclosed one's identity, usually without permission. Coming out is often a liberating experience for people who have previously hidden their identity. It can lead them to feel like they can be their authentic selves. However, trans people who have transitioned are not in the closet about their identity. So telling people that they are trans is a disclosure and is different than coming out. Trans people are not fooling or deceiving anyone about their identity by presenting themselves authentically as men or as women. So this is also talking about that umbrella, this umbrella. So someone may like fit in the category of trans man, but like now I'm a man, and I'm not fooling anyone by living as a man, and or vice versa for trans women. They may choose to still embrace that and share that history and be out, but if anybody watched Survivor, there's a guy named Zeke, and he was just playing the game as a man, and then another player outed him on national television. And so that's not okay, right? And it's different. I mean, whether it's about your gender identity or whether it's about your sexual identity, but it's just good to note that for trans people, it's not always a positive thing to be out, and it can be a dangerous thing. So, this is an invitation to explore your own sense of self. Maybe check out the unicorn. Think about what are some of the ways that what have you thought about these definitions, and what language do you use to describe your sense of self? because definitions can never encompass who we are as full human beings. The spiritual invitation is to cross divides of difference and take risks by authentically choosing to get to know one another. Labels can be tools of liberation or oppression. It's all in how we use them. So don't stop with simply learning definitions. Dig deeper. I'll just let you read through this one. You have this one. How to be more understanding and welcoming of transgender people. One I might point out is number 4. The term is transgender. There's no ED on the end of it. And even some transgender people, there's a show I watched, calls herself Transgendered. Still, I'm trying to make sure I say transgender. And another one, number 8, this is particularly important to me, to use the word children instead of boys and girls, and people instead of women and men. This is one thing that we have a strong habit of doing, but it can feel very exclusionary for people who don't fit the binary. So I'll let you, and number 1, respect a person's identity and self-label and pronouns. So the more that you can use what they tell you, the better. Wow, this is so long, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, let's
It's
finish up.
time.
Do you,
Let's finish up for now. Yeah.
That's all.
okay,
Yeah.
so I found this on the website. Dominant culture, this is part of the queer page. Dominant culture teaches us to depend on dualisms. Challenge yourself to eradicate dualisms from your language and your understanding of the world. Gay and straight, masculine and feminine, black and white, all dualisms obscure so many shades of gray, shades of queer, shades of androgyny and fluidity. Open yourself to infinite variety. So I rewrote, or adapted, I adapted and made a new litany of restoration. I get what Marjorie was doing, and it was, for that time, it was helpful. It does not matter, but it does matter. Our identities matter, especially in our culture. So I invite you to say this new litany with me. If, recognizing the interdependence of all life, we strive to build community, the strength we gather will be our salvation. If your skin is dark and mine is light, or tan, chocolate, mocha, or peach melba,
We
we
will
will
be
be
celebrated.
celebrated. If you are woman and I am man, or trans, non-binary, or gender fluid, we will be celebrated. If you are older and I am younger, or wise beyond your years, or eternally youthful, we will be celebrated. If you are straight and I am gay, or lesbian, bisexual, queer, pansexual, asexual, or something else, we will be celebrated. If you are Christian and I am Jewish, or Muslim, Baha'i, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, or none of the above,
We will be celebrated.
If we join spirits as siblings, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened, and we will change the world. In this spirit, we build community